looked at the world around you, the corporate ladder you're supposedly supposed to be climbing, or the absolute minefield of the modern dating scene,
Oh, absolutely.
right, and the chilling realities of the family court system, and, like, have you ever felt a creeping, undeniable suspicion that the entire game is just fundamentally rigged against you?
That is definitely a sentiment a lot of men are expressing right now.
I mean, really think about it. Have you ever felt like you're playing by this set of outdated rules designed to just extract your time, your money, your physical energy, while offering, well, absolutely zero protection or respect in return?
Yeah, a lot of guys feel like they're pouring into a bucket with a hole in the bottom.
Exactly. So if you are a man navigating today's institutions and you've ever felt that quiet, gnawing sense of betrayal when you do everything quote unquote right and still get punished for it, well, I want you to know you are not alone.
No, not at all.
And today, we are going to unpack exactly why you feel that way.
It's a really pervasive feeling. And as we'll see today, it's one that a growing movement argues is increasingly backed by some very startling historical analysis and, frankly, hard data.
We are diving incredibly deep into the architecture of that feeling. But before we dismantle the modern world, I need to ask you, the listener, to do us a huge favor.
Please do.
Please like and subscribe to this deep dive right now so you never miss our content. I say this because today's mission is just a massive one. We are doing an extensive, exhaustive review of a groundbreaking new ebook that's been making some very serious waves.
Yeah, it's called Diogenes the First MGTOW by Conrad Reicher.
Honestly, after reading it, this book reads like a vital war manual for navigating the modern world. It is ultra long, it is incredibly incisive, and it is endlessly fascinating in how it deconstructs society.
It really is a dense, provocative text.
It is. We strongly urge you to check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy this book for yourself. Have it open, read along, because the rabbit hole goes very deep today.
And while you're at it, make sure you follow the author, at Conrad Reicher, on Substack, Twitter, and YouTube to keep up with his ongoing research.
Definitely do that. Now, before we proceed, I need to make something very, very clear.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yes, the disclaimer. While the claims, the statistics, and the historical interpretations in this book are highly polarized and, deeply politically charged, our job today is not to take sides.
Exactly.
We are not here to endorse these viewpoints or to condemn them. We are just here to impartially report on the fascinating ideas and arguments that Conrad Reicher presents in the original source material.
We're just looking at the text.
Right. We are unpacking this philosophy step by step so you can fully understand the underlying mechanics of this massive growing cultural movement. The men going their own way, or MGTOW movement, and the broader red-pilled manosphere.
Yeah, we are your analytical guides to the text, nothing more, nothing less.
We just want to show you how this worldview is actually constructed.
What's fascinating here is that to understand this ultra-modern, internet-born movement, Reicher doesn't actually start his analysis in the 21st century.
No, he really doesn't.
He doesn't start with modern divorce rates or corporate HR policies at all. He takes us all the way back 2,300 years to ancient Greece.
Which is quite a leap.
It is. He argues, quite brilliantly actually, that a naked homeless Greek philosopher provided the exact step-by-step blueprint for the modern MGTOW movement.
Okay, so let's unpack this immediately because the juxtaposition is just wild. We are talking about Diogenes of Sinope.
Right.
Now, if you took Philosophy 101 in college, you probably just remember him as the eccentric, crazy guy who lived in a large clay jar, a pithos, right in the middle of the marketplace in Athens.
The guy who owned absolutely nothing.
Exactly. The guy who walked through the crowded streets in broad daylight carrying a lit lamp, shoving it in people's faces, claiming he was looking for an honest man.
Yeah, it sounds completely unhinged on the surface.
Right. So my immediate pushback when reading this was it is incredibly easy to look at a guy living in a barrel, eating literal scraps off the street, and call him a madman.
Sure.
How is this guy a strategic genius? How is he fundamentally different from someone today who just couldn't hack it and gave up on life?
Well, that is the exact misconception that Reicher attacks in the opening chapters. Reicher's thesis is that Diogenes wasn't homeless in the sense of being a victim of circumstance.
Okay.
And he certainly wasn't crazy. He was a strategic survivalist executing a highly calculated philosophy.
What calculated philosophy?
Interesting. Yeah, you have to understand the context. Diogenes looked at Athenian society, which at the time was the absolute pinnacle of human civilization, the birthplace of democracy, art, complex commerce,
Right, the center of the world.
and he recognized it as a beautifully decorated trap.
A trap.
Yes, a trap.
Mm.
He saw a system where men willingly sold their bodily autonomy, their psychological freedom, and the literal sweat of their brow for the mere illusion of social status and the promise of female companionship.
So he saw through the matrix, basically.
Exactly. Diogenes realized that to participate in that system, to desire the things the system told you to desire, was to be entirely enslaved by it.
So by dropping out, he wasn't failing the test of society. He was refusing to take the test altogether.
Right, he was escaping.
I was trying to conceptualize this while reading, and it feels like operating a submarine in stealth mode.
Wow, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like if you emit absolutely no sonar pings, if you have no mortgage, no marriage license, no corporate title, no reputation you care about, protecting the torpedoes of the modern institutional system literally have nothing to lock onto.
They just pass right by you.
Exactly. They just pass right by you.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it perfectly encapsulates the Greek concept of autarky, which Riker leans on heavily in the book.
Autarky. Let's define that.
It translates roughly to total self-sufficiency, but not just in a, grow your own tomatoes kind of way. It's a psychological and legal self-sufficiency. Diogenes weaponized minimalism. By owning absolutely nothing, the state, the legal system, and society at large had zero leverage over him.
Because it couldn't take anything away.
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of control. You cannot tax a man who holds no property and earns no official wage.
True.
You cannot cancel or blackmail a man who has zero reputation to protect and actively embraces public shame.
Right, he doesn't care what you think of him.
And crucially for the MGTOW philosophy, you cannot divorce, ruin, and extract resources from a man who flat out refuses to marry.
Wow. Yeah, that hits hard.
Diogenes saw property and marriage not as the crowning achievements of a successful male life, but as legal and emotional prisons designed to keep men laboring for the benefit of others.
And he wasn't exactly quiet about it either. Like, he wasn't just hiding in his barrel meditating. He was an active provocateur.
Oh, very much so.
Riker details how Diogenes would openly mock wedding ceremonies as they passed through the streets. He literally called them slave induction rituals.
He would follow brides and grooms, shouting that they were voluntarily chaining themselves to a life of misery.
It's wild, and he had this visceral, almost theatrical disgust for performative civility.
Yeah, Riker shares those stories of him urinating on elite philosophers.
Right, guys who are standing around debating abstract, high-minded concepts while completely ignoring the brutal truths of human nature.
He wanted to shatter the illusion.
Yeah, to expose the absolute absurdity of polite society.
Which brings us to perhaps his most famous encounter, a moment Riker frames as the foundational mythos of the sovereign man.
The Alexander the Great story.
Exactly. Alexander the Great, the most powerful man on the planet, the conqueror of the known world, a man who held the power of life and death over millions. He comes to Athens.
Right.
And he seeks out Diogenes. He finds him just lounging in the dirt, catching some sun.
Just chilling by his barrel.
Yeah. Alexander stands over him and says, "I am Alexander the Great. Ask anything of me, and I shall grant it."
I mean, that is the ultimate offer, right? The system coming to you and offering you infinite status, infinite wealth, infinite access to whatever you desired.
It's the ultimate temptation of the Matrix. And Diogenes doesn't flinch.
Not at all.
She simply looks up at the most dangerous man alive and replies, "Stand out of my sunlight."
Just incredible.
Riker spends pages breaking down the mechanics of this interaction. He points out that this wasn't just ancient arrogance or, a witty comeback.
Right.
This was the ultimate assertion of complete self-ownership. Think about the contrast. Alexander had massive armies, mountains of gold, palaces.
He was trapped.
Exactly. Entirely trapped by his duties, his paranoia, his need to maintain power, his endless thirst for conquest. He was a slave to his own ambition.
While Diogenes had nothing but the sun on his face, but he was completely free.
Alexander was the ruler of the world, but Diogenes was the ruler of himself. Riker frames this specific moment as the true birth of the MGTOW philosophy.
The realization that true power is needing absolutely nothing from the system. Man, if the system can't give you anything you want, the system can't control you. That is a heavy premise.
It really is.
So we move from this ancient philosophical rejection of marriage and property to Riker's extremely data-driven explanation of exactly why modern marriage is the ultimate trap for men.
And this is where the book gets very analytical.
Right. And listener, here's where the deep dive gets really intense because we have to look at the actual mechanics of modern relationships according to the source text.
We really do.
We are taught from birth, by Disney, by our parents, by Hollywood, that marriage is this beautiful partnership. It's built on unconditional love, mutual sacrifice, and building a life together.
Standard narrative.
Yeah, the standard narrative. But Riker aggressively dismantles that. He compares modern marriage to a rigged lottery where you might win a family for a few years, but you risk losing absolutely everything you've ever worked for the absolute moment the wind changes.
To explain the why behind this, Riker dives deep into evolutionary biology, specifically focusing on a behavioral concept called female hypergamy.
Hypergamy. Let's get into that.
According to the text, we have to look back at human evolution to understand modern dating. Hypergamy is defined as the deeply ingrained, instinctual drive for women to continuously seek out higher status, more resourced men.
Okay.
The argument here is that, evolutionarily speaking, in the harsh environment of the Pleistocene era, women were biologically wired to secure the absolute best possible provider and protector for themselves and their vulnerable offspring.
Right, because the stakes were literally life and death.
Exactly. If a woman settled for a low-status male who couldn't hunt or defend the tribe, she and her children literally died. Therefore, the instinct to marry up and constantly scan for a better option was a pure survival mechanism.
Right, but we don't live in caves anymore. I mean, we have grocery stores and police departments. So how does Riker apply this ancient biology to the modern era?
Well, Riker argues that biological instincts don't just vanish because we invented Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
He posits that in the modern world, this hypergamous instinct goes completely unchecked and is actually amplified by social media and dating apps, where the illusion of infinite choice exists.
Yeah, the paradox of choice.
Because survival is no longer on the line, hypergamy mutates into an endless quest for lifestyle upgrades and emotional novelty.
Novelty being the key word there.
Exactly. The text argues that this results in women instinctually discarding loyal, hardworking providers the absolute moment those men suffer a setback, like, say, losing a job or getting sick.
Or the moment a slightly wealthier, more exciting option comes along.
Right. Riker's core premise in this chapter is that male love is expected to be unconditional and sacrificial, while female love is inherently opportunistic and conditional upon the man's continued utility.
Wow. And he doesn't just leave this as a biological theory either.
No, he brings receipts.
He does. He argues that the modern legal system, specifically the family courts, is basically designed from the ground up to facilitate, protect, and financially reward this exact hypergamous instinct.
He really breaks down the history of family law to show how the mechanics shifted over time.
He starts with the tender years doctrine. Now, for the listener who isn't a legal scholar, the tender years doctrine was this legal principle from the 19th and 20th centuries that automatically assumed mothers were inherently the better caretakers for young children.
Which virtually guaranteed them custody.
Right, virtually guaranteed. But Riker notes that the courts eventually realized this sounded too obviously biased against men.
It wasn't politically correct anymore.
Exactly. So they evolved the language, they shifted to the modern best interest of the child standard.
Which sounds great on paper.
On paper, it sounds perfectly neutral and fair, right? Like, who could argue against the best interest of a child?
Nobody.
But Riker argues that best interest of the child is actually just legal camouflage.
Yeah, he calls it a coded phrase for gynocentric tyranny that allows judges infinite discretion to strip men of their children and their assets.
Exactly.
Riker spends a significant portion of the book looking at the financial mechanics of this legal standard. He argues that best interest almost always translates to maintaining the mother's lifestyle at the father's expense.
And the statistics Riker provides to back this up are genuinely staggering.
They really are. He cites a comprehensive 2019 study published in the Journal of Divorce and Remarriage.
What did that study find?
This study revealed that 67% of divorced men report utter financial devastation following the dissolution of their marriage.
Utter devastation.
Yes. They are forced to liquidate retirement accounts, sell their homes, and take on massive debt just to survive.
Well, women.
Meanwhile, the exact same study found that 74% of women actually maintain or improve their standard of living post-divorce.
Okay, wait. I have to push back here because those numbers just seem wild to me. Are these numbers cherry-picked?
It's a valid question.
I mean, how is it mathematically possible for one side of a dissolved partnership to experience a 67% devastation rate, while the other side sees a 74% improvement? where's the money coming from if the household income is split in half?
It's a crucial question, and Riker explains the mathematical mechanics behind it. The money doesn't magically appear out of nowhere. It is forcefully transferred.
Transferred.
Right. When a household splits, the man's income doesn't drop, but his obligations skyrocket. He is hit with alimony, which is calculated based on his gross income, not his net.
Oh, wow. Before taxes.
Yes. He is hit with child support, often calculated at maximum capacity, even if he loses his job or takes a pay cut.
And the legal fees.
He is forced to pay the legal fees for both sides in many cases. He loses the primary residence, but still has to pay the mortgage on it.
So he's paying for a house he can't live in?
Meanwhile, the woman receives the tax-free child support, the alimony, the equity from the home, and often qualifies for state assistance that the man's gross income disqualifies him from.
So he's subsidizing her new life entirely.
It's not cherry-picking, according to Riker. It's the intended design of a system that views the man purely as an extraction resource.
And it compounds dramatically when you look at who is actually ending these marriages.
The initiation stats.
Yeah, Riker notes that women initiate between 68% and 73% of all divorces.
And for college-educated women, that number jumps to nearly 90%.
90%. Yet, despite initiating the destruction of the contract, men pay 97% of all alimony.
It's massive imbalance.
If you look at those mechanics, Riker argues that the legal system functions not as an impartial arbiter of justice, but as a massive state-sponsored wealth transfer mechanism from men to women.
It incentivizes the breaking of the family because the initiator is financially rewarded for breaking it. He paints a picture of long-term wealth disparity that is just brutal. According to U.S. Census Bureau data cited in the text, never married men who have stayed entirely out of the system, have a median net worth of around $150,000.
Okay, so that's the baseline.
Divorced men, their median net worth plummets to an abysmal $25,000.
Wow.
They are functionally bankrupted. And the fallout isn't just restricted to financial capital, it's literal biological capital.
You mean their health?
Yes, it cost them their lives. Riker cites a major Stanford School of Medicine study showing that unmarried, lifelong single men actually live 10 to 15 years longer than married men.
10 to 15 years. That is an entire chapter of a life.
The study attributes this massive gap largely to significantly lower cortisol levels, lower blood pressure, and the absence of the chronic, low-grade psychological stress that comes from marital conflict.
And the looming threat of the family court sword of Damocles, I imagine.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture Riker is drawing, the legal system actively and ruthlessly enforces this extraction, regardless of logic or fairness.
Right.
To illustrate the pure mechanics of this, he points to the legal concept of equitable estoppel.
Okay, explain equitable estoppel to the audience, because when I read this part of the book, my blood literally ran cold.
It is a highly controversial legal principle, and Riker uses a terrifying 2018 paternity fraud case in Iowa to demonstrate it.
Walk us through the case.
In this specific case, a man was married, had a child, and eventually divorced. He was ordered to pay child support, which he dutifully paid for 14 years.
14 years, okay.
Eventually, suspicions arose, and court-ordered DNA testing definitively proved that he was not the biological father.
Oh, man.
His ex-wife had cheated, knowingly lied to him for over a decade, and used the court to extract money from him to raise another man's child.
So, logic dictates that the court would immediately halt the payments, force her to pay restitution for the fraud, and perhaps pursue criminal charges for perjury, right?
Logic, yes, but not family law.
What happened?
The court denied him any refund and kept him on the hook for future payments under the doctrine of equitable estoppel.
You're kidding.
No. The court essentially argued that because he had acted as the father and because severing the financial support would harm the child's standard of living, he was legally obligated to continue paying.
So the fraud didn't matter.
The biological truth, the egregious deceit of the mother, and the violation of the man's consent were deemed entirely irrelevant.
That is insane.
Riker uses this to prove that the courts will abandon all basic tenets of justice to ensure the financial security of the mother. The system requires a male host, and it doesn't care if the host was tricked into the role.
And it's not just about money and paternity either. It's about how the courts handle the narrative of abuse.
This is a really dark section of the book.
He shares this harrowing anecdote that really grounds this in everyday reality. He talks about a 42-year-old accountant in Texas.
Just an average guy.
Yeah, average guy, works hard. One night, he notices his wife's phone constantly buzzing at 3 a.m. with texts from another man.
Red flag.
Big red flag. He picks up the phone, reads explicitly romantic texts, and confronts her about the obvious, undeniable cheating.
Right.
Now, how does she react? Does she break down? Does she apologize?
No, she doesn't.
No. She immediately calls the police, tells them she feels quote-unquote unsafe, and accuses him of emotional abuse and coercive control simply for looking at her phone and raising his voice in shock.
And according to Riker's analysis, the legal and social system protects that narrative of female victimhood unconditionally.
What happens when the cops show up?
The police arrive and remove the husband from his own home. He is slapped with a temporary restraining order, which immediately impacts his custody rights.
Without any physical violence even occurring.
None. The husband's entirely rational human reaction to profound betrayal is pathologized and criminalized by the state, while the wife's infidelity and psychological manipulation are protected under the guise of her privacy and safety.
It's completely inverted.
Riker argues this perfectly illustrates how modern emotional restraint is a one-way street. Any normal friction, anger, or demand for accountability from a man is now instantly labeled as abuse.
Just to ensure female dominance in the relationship and absolute leverage in the courtroom.
Exactly.
So, if marriage is a literal financial and legal trap, what about just casually dating?
Yeah.
What about basic interactions with women?
That's the logical next question.
Because a guy might listen to this deep dive right now and think, fine, I won't get married. I'll just date. I'll just be a gentleman, open doors, pay for dinner, and keep things light.
Sounds safe enough.
Right. But Riker argues that the danger isn't just in signing a marriage license. He claims that even basic traditional chivalry has been completely weaponized into a legal and financial liability for men.
This is a crucial pivot in his argument, moving from family law to everyday civil law and social dynamics. He points to the modern weaponization of the restraining order as the ultimate trump card in dating and breakups.
The ultimate trump card.
Yes. Riker cites research showing that a staggering 68% of false restraining orders are filed by women against male partners, specifically during the initial stages of a breakup, divorce, or custody battle.
So it's a strategic move.
They aren't filed out of genuine fear. They are filed to gain immediate tactical leverage. A restraining order instantly evicts the man from his home, cuts off his access to his children, and prejudices the judge against him before a single piece of evidence is even heard.
He also throws out a stat that in the UK, 85% of all restraining orders are issued against men.
Right.
But I want to challenge Riker's methodology here a bit. How much of that 85% is actually due to systemic bias in the courts, and how much of it is just a reflection of actual reported incidents of violence, given that men are statistically more physically aggressive? How does he separate the two?
Well, Riker acknowledges that physical violence obviously exists, but he points to cases where mutual abuse is documented,
What does that mean?
where police arrive and both parties have marks, or where the woman was the clear initial aggressor. Even in those scenarios, the Duluth model, which is the dominant framework used by law enforcement in domestic calls, predicates that domestic violence is fundamentally a tool of patriarchal control.
So the theory overrides the evidence.
Exactly. Therefore, the man is almost automatically designated as the primary aggressor, regardless of the physical evidence on the scene.
Wow.
Riker argues the 85% statistic is a reflection of a deeply ingrained institutional bias that refuses to view women as capable of initiating violence or using the legal system as a weapon of harassment.
He compares this cultural shift to the Me Too movement, which he argues resulted in the total destruction of due process for men across all institutions, colleges, workplaces, and the media.
Yes, he brings up the infamous 2004 Duke lacrosse case to illustrate the mechanics of this panic.
For those who don't remember, innocent male athletes had their reputations, their academic careers, and their lives absolutely destroyed by a completely fabricated rape accusation made by an exotic dancer.
The Duke lacrosse case is the perfect microcosm for Riker's argument because of how the institutions reacted.
Right, it wasn't just the accusation, it was the institutional response.
Exactly. The university faculty immediately condemned the young man. The media descended and convicted him in the court of public opinion.
The prosecutor went rogue, right?
The prosecutor withheld exculpatory evidence just to ride the wave of public outrage. The institutions immediately presumed their guilt based entirely on their race, gender, and status as athletes.
And even when they were fully exonerated.
When the DNA didn't match, and the accuser finally admitted to lying, the men's lives were permanently scarred. and the accuser faced virtually no consequences for attempting to send innocent men to prison for decades.
It's terrifying.
Riker uses this to declare that in today's climate, the foundational legal principle of innocent until proven guilty is dead for men. A man is guilty the moment a woman points a finger, and the burden of proof is entirely on him to prove a negative.
And he extends this concept of automatic liability down to the most mundane, everyday interactions you can possibly imagine.
Right, the chivalry argument.
Yeah. Riker argues that extending generosity or hospitality, the core tenets of traditional chivalry, is no longer rewarded by society. It is actively exploited by the legal system.
It's a huge liability.
Let's really game this out. Let's say you invite a woman to a park for a Sunday date, or you decide to host a neighborhood BBQ in your backyard. You're just being a good guy, a generous host, a pillar of the community, right?
Well, Riker provides real-world counterexamples that show exactly how modern tort law treats that traditional generosity. He details a civil case in Florida where a man suggested a casual first date at a public city-owned park.
Just a normal date.
Right. They're walking along, and the woman trips on an uneven piece of pavement and severely injures her ankle.
Ouch.
She sues the city, but she also sues the date.
She sued the guy.
Yes. And the court ruled that because the man suggested the location and orchestrated the date, he assumed the duty of care.
You have got to be kidding me.
No, he assumed liability for her safety, and he was held financially responsible for her medical bills.
It's mind-blowing. It completely redefines the concept of personal agency. If she walks to the park alone and trips, it's an accident. If he invites her and she trips, it's his fault.
Exactly.
What about the BBQ example?
In Texas, a man hosted a community BBQ in his backyard. He had a large industrial grill. A female guest, ignoring basic common sense and the clear warning signs, leaned over, touched the hot metal of the grill, burned her hand badly, and subsequently sued the host.
And she won.
The court ruled the host was negligent for not providing a sufficient physical barrier around the grill, even though it's an obvious hazard.
Unbelievable.
Riker uses these specific cases to argue a chilling point. Under modern legal frameworks, male action equals automatic fault.
So if you do anything, you're on the hook.
If you organize it, if you pay for it, or if you host it, you are legally and financially responsible for any negative outcome, regardless of the woman's own choices, her clumsiness, or her negligence. Your generosity is a legal contract you didn't know you signed.
He contrasts this directly and kind of hilariously with Diogenes. Remember, Diogenes refused to carry a woman's basket in the marketplace.
He refused to do anything for anyone.
Right. He refused to pay for anything. He refused to hold doors. He refused to offer any form of traditional chivalry. People called him rude. But Riker points to a fascinating 2023 study published in Evolution and Human Behavior.
The one about how modern women perceive male generosity.
Exactly. The study found that women consistently perceive highly generous, overly accommodating men as less sexually attractive.
Counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, they view excessive generosity not as strength or virtue, but as a signal of neediness, low status, and a lack of romantic options.
The psychological mechanism is that if a man has to buy your time with dinners and favors, he must not have intrinsic value.
Exactly. Riker concludes that women fundamentally perceive chivalrous men as weak, and the legal system treats them as endlessly liable. Therefore, the only logical self-preserving move is to completely stop offering it.
This deep dive into the mechanics of legal liability and biological instinct raises a massive overarching question, which Riker addresses in the next major section of the book.
The big why.
Yes, how did society actually get to this point? How did we arrive at a cultural and legal framework where traditional male virtue, ambition, and generosity are actively punished, while female leverage, biological opportunism, and perpetual victimhood are absolute?
Because systems don't just change overnight by accident.
No, they don't. Riker traces this directly to the deliberate ideological capture of our institutions by Marxists and feminists over the last century.
This is where the book shifts from legal analysis to political history. He talks extensively about Antonio Gramsci.
The Italian Marxist philosopher.
Right, who wrote his most famous work, The Prison Notebooks, while locked up by Mussolini in the 1920s and 30s. Gramsci looked at the failure of communist revolutions in Western Europe and realized that Marx was actually wrong about one key thing.
The working class wasn't going to rebel.
Exactly. Gramsci realized you didn't need a violent, armed revolution of the working class. The workers weren't going to rise up because they were steeped in the cultural values of the West, Christianity, the nuclear family, and patriotism.
So he proposed a new mechanism.
It's a slow march through the institutions. The idea was that intellectuals must slowly infiltrate and hijack the academy, the media, the courts, and eventually corporate HR departments to change the culture from the inside out.
You change the culture, and the politics will naturally follow. And Riker argues this slow march has been spectacularly, almost unbelievably successful. He cites a bombshell statistic from a survey published in Inside Higher Ed.
What was the number?
83% of faculty in gender studies and sociology departments across the United States openly identify as Marxists or radical progressives.
83%. That's a monopoly.
Think about the implications of that. Riker posits that these are no longer educational departments engaged in the pursuit of objective truth.
Right.
They are ideological indoctrination camps that have completely abandoned the scientific method in favor of grievance politics and critical theory. They are factories churning out the HR managers and policymakers of tomorrow, all programmed with the belief that Western society is an oppressive patriarchy that must be dismantled.
He details how this ideology fundamentally and systematically pathologizes normal male behavior right from childhood.
The toxic masculinity concept.
Yeah, we hear the term toxic masculinity everywhere now, in Gillette commercials, in corporate sensitivity training, in magazine articles. But Riker points out something crucial. Toxic masculinity is not a medical or psychological diagnosis.
It doesn't appear in the DSM-5.
It is a fabricated political weapon invented specifically to shame men for their natural instincts. He looks at the education system as the ground zero for this.
Where the feminization starts.
Right. He notes that 85% of primary school teachers are female. In these highly feminized, strictly controlled classrooms, normal, energetic, competitive, rough and tumble, boyish behavior is immediately treated as a behavioral disorder.
Boys are overwhelmingly diagnosed and medicated with amphetamines for ADHD.
Simply because their biological imperative doesn't allow them to sit quietly in a circle for 8 hours a day and behave exactly like little girls. We are literally drubbing boys to make them compliant.
Furthermore, Riker takes direct aim at the corporate world, specifically the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion industrial complex.
It's everywhere now.
He argues that this complex has infected the corporate sphere and replaced the traditional male hierarchies of merit, competence, and objective results with a new system based entirely on ideological compliance and immutable characteristics.
Which leads to institutional collapse.
And he argues this shift is leading to real-time, visible institutional collapse across society.
Let's really ground this. What does this all mean for the average guy working a mid-level corporate job? Let's say you're an engineer or an accountant. You don't care about politics. You're just trying to keep your head down, do good work, and earn a living.
Right.
How does this affect him on a random Tuesday morning staff meeting?
Riker explains the mechanics of this corporate environment using Herbert Marcuse's concept of repressive tolerance.
Marcuse from the Frankfurt School?
Exactly. The intellectuals who fled Germany and brought critical theory to American universities. Marcuse wrote an essay arguing that for a progressive revolution to truly succeed, society must completely invert the concept of tolerance.
Meaning what, exactly?
It must only tolerate progressive, left-wing views while actively, aggressively repressing and crushing traditional conservative, or in this case, traditional male identities and speech.
So how does that play out in the office?
For that average guy in the corporate staff meeting, repressive tolerance means that if a female coworker aggressively interrupts him, she is praised for leaning in and finding her voice. But if he firmly defends his project or pushes back against a bad idea, he's reported to HR for being combative, creating an unsafe environment, or mansplaining. His actual competence at his job is secondary to his submission to the woke ideological framework of the office.
Riker gives some terrifying high-level examples of this triumph of ideology over reality. He mentions a massive Harvard Business Review study that was published a few years ago.
The diverse team study.
Yeah, it famously claimed that highly diverse teams were objectively more innovative and generated more revenue than homogeneous teams. This study was cited everywhere, by Fortune 500 CEOs, by the government, by universities. It was the gospel of DEI.
Until it wasn't.
But Riker points out that it had to be quietly retracted. Why? Because the data was completely fabricated. The researchers couldn't find the data to support their hypothesis, so they just manipulated the numbers to fit the ideology.
It's credible.
He also points to the U.S. Army. The military recently lowered its physical fitness standards, specifically for the combat fitness test, because women were failing it at disproportionate rates. The military directly compromised its lethal combat readiness because biological reality didn't match their DEI diversity quotas.
It's the ultimate triumph of ideology over objective reality. Riker mentions a recent panel at Columbia University titled, "Without Irony, Abolish Biological Sex."
Abolish biological sex.
Yes, where academics argued that male and female are just colonial constructs. He highlights a syllabus at the University of Michigan that literally blamed the construct of the patriarchy for the melting polar ice caps.
You can't make this up.
But Riker emphasizes that we shouldn't just laugh at this as campus absurdity. He explains how the Church of Woke, as he calls it, weaponizes language to achieve absolute control over thought.
Yeah, the linguistic breakdown in the book is insidious. Words like cisgender, lived experience, microaggression, or equity.
They're highly calibrated terms.
Riker argues these aren't just new vocabulary words evolving naturally. They are meticulously crafted linguistic spells designed to short-circuit logic and bypass critical thinking.
It's about compliance.
If an HR department forces a man to publicly apologize for his unconscious privilege, or if a university forces him to put pronouns in his bio that contradict biological reality, they aren't just asking for politeness, they are breaking his will.
Exactly.
They are forcing him to deny what his own eyes see and what his own mind knows to be true. It's a submission ritual.
Exactly. Riker argues that the mechanism of control is forcing you to agree to a lie. Once you accept the foundational premise that your fundamental nature as a man is inherently toxic, oppressive, or flawed, you have already lost the war.
Because you've internalized the defeat.
You have voluntarily surrendered your psychological sovereignty to the institution. You can no longer defend yourself because you've agreed with your accusers that you are the villain.
Okay, so Riker has painted an incredibly dark, suffocating picture of the modern world. He's laid out the financial traps of modern marriage, the absolute hostility of the family courts, the death of chivalry and assumption of liability, and the Marxist linguistic capture of our schools and workplaces.
It is a very bleak diagnosis.
If you are a man listening to this deep dive right now, and you look around and realize you buy into Riker's premise, the obvious screaming question is, what the hell do you actually do? How does a modern man actually go MGTRW, survive this matrix, and keep his sanity?
This is exactly where the book shifts gears from a bleak diagnosis of the disease to a radical prescription for the cure.
The sovereign solution.
Yes. Riker outlines actionable, granular solutions for the listener, an overarching philosophy which he calls the sovereign solution. It is built heavily around a strict 7-day regimen he calls the Diogenes protocol.
It's not political activism, right?
No, this isn't about political activism at all. It's a protocol for reclaiming total self-ownership of your mind and body.
Let's break this protocol down day by day, because it is intense and highly countercultural. Days 1 through 4 are all focused on mental and emotional detoxification.
Detoxifying the mind.
Day 1 is entirely about rejecting emotional blackmail. It's about training yourself to recognize the exact moment when a woman, a boss, or an institution is using guilt, shame, or the threat of withdrawal to control your actions.
And what's the solution?
Riker says the solution is learning to simply say the word no without offering a single word of justification.
That's powerful.
Day 2 escalates this to eliminating parasitic relationships. He advises men to ruthlessly audit their lives and cut off the people, even close friends and family members, who drain your time, money, and emotional resources without offering absolute loyalty and value in return.
Just sever the ties.
But day 3 is where it gets truly fascinating, the shame fast.
The shame fast is Riker's most direct, practical homage to Diogenes. Riker instructs men to intentionally and systematically do something socially awkward or mildly embarrassing every single day.
Like what?
The instructions are specific. Wear mismatched, ugly clothes to the grocery store. Sing loudly to yourself while walking down a busy sidewalk. When someone asks you a question in a meeting, sit in total uncomfortable silence for 10 seconds before answering.
Okay, I have to jump in and push back here because this sounds crazy. Singing in public, wearing garbage clothes, doesn't doing that just make you look completely unhinged?
Bro,
how does intentionally making yourself a social pariah actually give you power, especially if you still have to hold down a job in a corporate setting? I'm not buying it yet.
it's a fair question, but Riker explains the neuroscience and psychology behind it. The goal isn't to be a nuisance or to get fired. The goal is exposure therapy for the amygdala.
Exposure therapy, okay.
Raker argues that modern men are paralyzed by the fear of social ostracization. We conform because we are terrified of being canceled, mocked, or deemed weird by the herd.
So you lean into it.
The shame fast systematically breaks your internal biological need for social approval. If you realize that you can withstand public judgment, that people looking at you like you're crazy doesn't actually physically harm you, you become incredibly dangerous to the system.
Wow.
If you do not fear shame, society loses its primary mechanism of control over you. You can no longer be bullied into compliance by the threat of embarrassment.
That actually makes a terrifying amount of sense. It's callousing the mind. And that leads perfectly into day 4, which is mastering the power of silence.
Right, weaponized silence.
Riker argues that men have been conditioned to over-explain, to apologize, and to constantly justify their actions to women and to authorities to prove they are quote-unquote good guys.
Justifying our existence.
By weaponizing total silence, you refuse to play defense. You force the manipulators to fill the void, which usually leads to them exposing their own irrationality.
It flips the dynamic entirely.
Then, on days 5 and 6, the protocol shifts from emotional defense to physical and intellectual armoring. Day 5 is entirely about physical fitness as literal biological armor.
But he's very specific about the type of fitness.
But it's specific, right? Riker mandates heavy compound weightlifting. He cites endocrinology studies detailing how lifting heavy weights physically alters the brain. It drastically boosts free testosterone and significantly lowers baseline cortisol.
Biology over ideology.
He argues that physical strength is no longer just for health. It is a political act in a world that actively wants men soft, medicated, and compliant.
And if day 5 is the body, day 6 focuses entirely on armoring the mind. Riker urges men to abandon modern progressive education and master the trivium.
The trivium, for the listener, what is that?
The trivium is the classical ancient education model consisting of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Riker argues that by mastering this specific framework, a man can effortlessly dismantle feminist sophistry and Marxist doublespeak in real time.
Break the mechanics of that down for me. How does a guy actually use the trivium if he's cornered in an argument about, say, toxic masculinity?
It's a 3-step process. First is grammar, which isn't about punctuation, it's about strictly defining the terms.
Okay.
If someone accuses a man of toxic masculinity, the trivium-trained man stops the conversation and forces the accuser to precisely define the term with empirical evidence, refusing to let them use it as a vague emotional weapon.
So you don't accept their premise.
Second is logic, which is analyzing the structure of the argument. You identify the logical fallacies like ad hominem attacks or appeals to emotion and point out the contradictions in their premise.
And the third?
Third is rhetoric, which is the ability to communicate the logical truth persuasively and calmly, completely devoid of anger. By applying this, you parse the language so effectively that you simply cannot be brainwashed by emotional slogans. You see the code of the matrix.
And this all culminates in day 7, which is the formation of parallel off-grid brotherhoods.
The final step.
Riker says that once men have achieved this sovereignty, they are abandoning the institutions entirely. They are gathering together in private networks to share hard physical skills, train tactically with firearms, study constitutional and common law, and even use blockchain IDs and decentralized cryptocurrencies to avoid government tracking and the upcoming central bank digital currencies.
Building a parallel society.
So I have to ask the ultimate question. Is this just about running away? Is Riker ultimately just telling men to throw their hands up, hide in the woods, and give up on Western civilization entirely?
Riker is emphatic that this is not a retreat. He calls it a strategic withdrawal.
Strategic withdrawal.
You aren't running away in defeat. You are actively, deliberately starving a corrupt parasitic system of its fuel, which is your labor, your taxes, your utility, and your compliance.
Are there real-world examples of this working?
To prove this is happening, he points to real-world functioning examples. He details a secretive group in Ohio called the Cynic Cell, named after Diogenes' school of cynicism.
Wow.
Here, men gather to train physically, study philosophy, and build robust, cash-based local businesses entirely outside the corporate DEI structure. He also highlights a fascinating community called Vietnamese, or the Old Man community, in rural Estonia.
In Estonia?
Yes. There, dozens of men live completely off-grid, totally free of marriage contracts, alimony threats, and state interference, pooling their resources to achieve absolute independence.
Riker insists these men are not the angry, bitter, or broken basement dwellers the media portrays MGTOW men to be.
Far from it.
They are the opposite. They are building highly functioning, incredibly low-stress, sovereign lives. They have entirely removed themselves from the matrix of female validation and state taxation. And what's amazing is that the financial data supports the strategy.
It really does.
He cites research from MIT showing that single men who focus entirely on themselves build 40% more wealth by age 65 compared to married men, simply because their resources aren't siphoned off by divorce courts or excessive lifestyle inflation demanded by a spouse.
To put a human face on this data, he shares the story of James.
Let's hear about James.
James was a high-level Google engineer pulling in a massive salary, but he realized the crushing corporate grind, the mandatory HR diversity seminars, and the toxic modern dating scene in Silicon Valley were psychologically destroying him.
So what did he do?
So James executed the protocol. He quit his job, cashed out his investments, and moved to a small cabin in Montana. Today, he lives on just $12,000 a year.
That's nothing.
He grows his own food, chops his own wood, and writes code part-time for decentralized crypto projects. He achieved total, unassailable autonomy.
He escaped.
He has no boss to appease, no HR department to fear, no wife to divorce him, and zero debt. Riker holds James up not as a hermit, but as the modern, high-tech incarnation of Diogenes sitting in his barrel.
It is a profound, earth-shattering paradigm shift. Riker is essentially looking the listener in the eye and saying that true wealth isn't a massive 401k, a corner office, or a luxury car. True wealth is absolute, unbroken sovereignty over your own time, your own resources, and your own mind.
If we connect all of this intense historical analysis, the legal breakdowns, and the biological realities back to the bigger picture, it leads to a final, rather provocative thought that Riker implies, but leaves for the reader to fully grasp.
Get honest.
We've discussed all these active strategies today, the heavy lifting, the mastery of logic, the formation of off-grid communities. But remember the original inspiration for this entire philosophy. Diogenes of Sinope didn't write massive political manifestos. He didn't form political action committees to lobby the government. He didn't bother arguing with his accusers in court, and he certainly didn't beg the Athenian assembly to grant him his rights.
He just opted out.
He simply remained silent, lived in his barrel, and lived completely, utterly free.
Wow. That is the ultimate flex of power.
So this raises an incredibly important question for you, the listener, to mull over long after this deep dive ends. What if the ultimate weapon against a culture of perpetual outrage, emotional manipulation, and the total ideological capture of our institutions isn't shouting back?
What if it's not a fight at all?
Right. What if the ultimate weapon isn't a louder argument on Twitter, a better political campaign, or a lawsuit? What if the most destructive thing you can do to a system that hates you is to offer it the absolute, unshakable silence of a man who has completely and utterly walked away?
The unshakable silence of a man who has walked away. That is a chilling, powerful, and deeply liberating thought to leave on. As we wrap up this massive deep dive, I want to take a moment to reiterate our core mission today.
We're just looking at the text.
We set out to impartially explore, deconstruct, and report on these intense, highly polarized, red-pilled ideas presented by Conrad Riker for the MRA and Manosphere audience. We haven't taken sides. We've simply unpacked the complex philosophical, legal, and statistical mechanics of the text so you can truly understand the engine driving this rapidly growing cultural shift.
It is a shift that, regardless of how one feels about it politically, is undoubtedly reshaping how millions of men view their own value and how they choose to interact with society, the law, and modern relationships.
Absolutely. The landscape is changing. And if this deep dive sparked your interest, if it gave words to that quiet feeling of betrayal you've been carrying, or even if it deeply challenged your perspective, I emphatically urge you to go check Amazon, Kindle, and Google Playbooks right now.
It's highly recommended reading.
Look up and buy Conrad Riker's ebook, Diogenes the First MGTOW. Don't just take our word for it. Read the full unabridged text and dive into the data for yourself. And remember to follow the author at Conrad N. Riker on Substack, Twitter, and YouTube for more of his ongoing research and writings.
The historical connections he makes between ancient philosophy, evolutionary biology, and modern institutional dynamics are undeniably thought-provoking and require careful study.
They really do. Finally, please do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our show right now.
Please do.
Liking and subscribing ensures that you never miss another one of our deep dives into the vital information and the cutting-edge sources that matter most to you in navigating this chaotic world.
Until next time.
We started today by asking if you felt the game was rigged against you. We've laid out exactly how the board is constructed. Whether you believe the solution is to stay and try to change the rules, or, like Diogenes, to simply smile, turn your back, and stop playing altogether, well, the choice and the sovereignty is now entirely yours. Thanks for listening.